So now I would like to introduce Graham Sherman, a commissioned officer in the U.S. Coast Guard. Graham is a graduate of the U.S. Coast Guard Academy with a BS in Civil Engineering, Leadership, and Nautical Science. He's currently attending Georgia Tech for his master's degree.
Yeah, and he's also completed more than 100 at-sea boardings, which is no small feat by any means. And these were focused on drug interdiction, immigration, ecology, and safety.
Yeah. He actually a reincarnation of John Paul Jones, I think. As a commissioned officer, Graham has been aboard 2 Coast Guard cutters as the XO and has been in strategic leadership positions in the Coast Guard's 5th Division Cutter Program.
I'm not sure about John Paul Jones, but I'll guarantee you he's strong. As you know, that is Peter's call sign. All right, with no further ado, please join me in welcoming Graham Sherman.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Before I get started here, I just wanted to say thank you all very much for the opportunity to talk about the Coast Guard today, especially since I've been in school for about a year now. It's been just as long since I got to wear the uniform and do Coast Guard things. So this is actually a nice breath of fresh air for me. Thank you very much for the invitation to do this. Can everybody see my screen?
We can.
Okay. So my name is Graham Sherman. I'm a lieutenant in the United States Coast Guard, and I've been in the Coast Guard for 10 years. And I've served aboard 3 ships with about 5.5 years of sea time. One as a department head, one as an XO, and one as a commanding officer. And today I'm going to be discussing what the Coast Guard is, what we do, and how we benefit our country. And first off, I'd like to start with a little fact here that a lot of people don't know. And the Coast Guard is actually the oldest continuous seagoing service in the United States, because after the Revolutionary War, the Navy disbanded, and then in 1790, the Coast Guard was formed as the Revenue Cutter Service, and it wasn't until 1798 that the Navy was formed. So for 8 years there, the Coast Guard stood as the United States' only armed force on the water. So that's an interesting fact to get us started here today. Let's see here. Okay, so what is the Coast Guard? The Coast Guard is one of the United States' 5 military services. A lot of people also don't know that we are, in fact, a military branch. And just like the other branches, we exist to defend and preserve the United States of America. And we do this by protecting the nation from internal and external threats. We do it from natural and man-made disasters in the United States ports and inland waterways, as well as on the coast and upon the international waters. And we're focused on personal safety and the security of the United States citizens, as well as any foreign nationals that are permitted to be in our waters. We are preserving the marine transportation system and its infrastructure in terms of patrolling our ports and protecting our major ports and waterways. We also preserve our natural and economic resources and maintain the integrity of our territorial seas. We're a military multi-mission maritime force, and we offer a unique blend of capabilities. All the other services provide military, humanitarian, and diplomatic capabilities. Where the Coast Guard differentiates itself from the other services are that we have law enforcement authority, and we can actually regulate, whereas these other services don't have that law enforcement authority or the ability to regulate the laws and other regulations that we have. So because of that, a lot of these other military services call upon us to do joint operations with them to extend their ability to do certain things on missions that you might not know about. And we're going to talk about some of those here in the next couple of slides. Our 3 broad roles as a military service are maritime safety, maritime security, and maritime stewardship. So in terms of safety, we're responding to boaters in distress. Security, we're protecting our waters from both domestic and foreign terrorism. And maritime stewardship, we're also in charge of licensing all merchant mariners and documenting all United States flag vessels. And we actually write and manage the international navigation rules. So the rules of the road, we manage all that stuff. And we're going to talk about that in vast detail here in the next few slides. So another thing that the Coast Guard is, before I play this video, just to give you a little background here, this is a video snippet of George W. Bush speaking at the United States Coast Guard Academy class of 2008 graduation. Part of our indoctrination at the Academy is to learn various jargon. And one of those questions is, what is the Coast Guard? And the answer may be a little bit different than something you've heard. So give me a second here to get this timed correctly. Let me make sure this is working here. Okay.
What is the Coast Guard?
Mr. President, the Coast Guard is required to establish name for, sir.
So while that may have been hard to understand, what the class responded in unison with was the Coast Guard is the hard nucleus about which the Navy forms in times of war. And I know that's been heard many times over the years, and I wanted to provide a brief explanation as to what that means. So in normality, we fall under the Department of Homeland Security. However, when the United States declares war or at the request and order of the president, the Coast Guard actually has the ability to fold into the Navy. And so during World War I, Vietnam, World War II, Korea, we actually folded into the United States Navy for those wars and conflicts. So it's another fact that a lot of people don't know as well. And I learned it as recently as being at the Coast Guard Academy 10 years ago. So it's a little known fact, but it's an interesting one for sure. So what does the Coast Guard do in terms of our statutory mission? So I'm going to go specifically into the 11 statutory missions that the Coast Guard does and what they mean. So the first one is ports and waterway security. And what that means is we're protecting our marine resources and our maritime commerce in our major ports and our waterways. And we're conducting anti-terrorism patrols as well as counterterrorism patrols if we get word of any sort of planned terrorist attack. And I'm sure, as you can probably deduct from hearing that, there's plenty of potential threats that the general public does not hear about that the Coast Guard and the other services do respond to here in the homeland. So we do those anti-terrorism and counterterrorism patrols regularly. The other mission, the second mission that we have listed here is drug interdiction. The Coast Guard is the first line of defense to disrupt and deter illegal smuggling, as well as seizing the narcotics that are planned to come into the United States, find their ways onto the streets of the U.S. And with the drug epidemic that we have in this country, that starts with the frontline defense. Any of the vessels that get by the frontline defense and make their way to the United States, that stuff always finds its way onto the streets, and that's no good. Aids to navigation is the third mission, and what that means is we're carrying and maintaining our aids to navigation, which are buoys. So a lot of the buoys you see on the waterways, most of them are actually maintenance and managed by the United States Coast Guard. Some of them are managed by our state and local partners, but most of them are Coast Guard maintenance. We also perform a vast amount of search and rescue, preventing loss of life, property damage, and personal injury by assisting and responding to mariners in distress. Living marine resources, which we're ensuring a rich, diverse, and sustainable ocean environment. And what that specifically means is we're protecting the ocean from pollution to help maintain our fishery stock so that we can continue to feed the United States from the waters. Marine safety, we are licensing mariners, as I previously mentioned. We document all the U.S. flag vessels in the country, and we also perform recreational boating safety, which is where the vast majority of the public comes into contact with the Coast Guard. Is, let's say my dad, Peter Sherman, wants to take his personal boat out on the water. The Coast Guard would go on board his boat and make sure he has all of his safety gear in place and ready to go and in compliance with regulations. Defense readiness, this is the big mission that is vastly unknown to Americans, is that the United States Coast Guard conducts maritime intercept operations, deployed port operations and security and defense, peacetime engagements, and environmental defense operations. And this refers primarily to our 6 Coast Guard cutters that we have stationed in Manama, Bahrain, over in the Middle East, that are out there doing patrols in the Straits of Hormuz. And I've got a good picture to show some of the action that they've been getting here recently. That's going to come at the end of this PowerPoint presentation. Migrant interdiction, which is pretty self-explanatory, preventing illegal immigration on the sea, which is usually done in man-made vessels that are highly unsafe and unseaworthy. And I've got another good picture to show that as well. Marine environmental protection, where we're preserving the livelihood of our endangered marine species by ideally preventing, but also responding to any sort of pollution event that is occurring and investigating those thoroughly, holding the people that did that accountable, and then putting new steps in place to ensure that it doesn't happen again in the future. Ice operations, we're facilitating safe maritime commerce in icy waters, mainly the Great Lakes for us right now, but we're definitely looking to get involved in the Arctic, as a lot of you know already, with the Polar Security Cutter that we have coming online, hopefully in the next few years. And then law enforcement, which refers to preventing our legal fishing vessels from different countries, from foreign nations, from depleting our fisheries illegally in the U.S. exclusive economic zone, which refers to the area of water that extends from 12 nautical miles to 200 nautical miles offshore of the United States. So those are our missions. A little bit about our history. Again, we were established in 1790 as the Revenue Cutter Service. In 1915, the Revenue Cutter Service actually merged with the United States Life Saving Service and was renamed the U.S. Coast Guard. And that's the time that we actually took on search and rescue as a primary mission. And then in 1939, the Lighthouse Service also merged into the Coast Guard. And while those were still in service and being used as aids to navigation for mariners back then, the Coast Guard was actually manning and staffing and maintaining those lighthouses. In 1946, the Bureau of Marine Inspection and Navigation transferred to the Coast Guard, which at that time puts us in charge of all the marine licensing, puts us in charge of merchant vessel safety, and then managing the international navigation rules. And then in 1967, we joined the Department of Transportation. And then after 9/11, we joined the Department of Homeland Security in 2003. So it's a little bit about the Coast Guard's history. Today's Coast Guard, we are a federal law enforcement agency and a military force. And in times of peace, we're doing all those statutory missions I just discussed with you under the Department of Homeland Security. And in times of war, at the direction of the president, we will then serve under the Department of the Navy, defend the nation against terrorism, foreign threats, and help the Navy fight the war to win. A day in the Coast Guard. So this is some statistics for everybody on a day in the Coast Guard here. We conduct 45 search and rescue cases a day, save 10 lives a day, and we save $1.2 million in property a day. We also seize 874 pounds of cocaine and 214 pounds of marijuana. We conduct 57 waterborne patrols of our marine critical infrastructure, which again refers to those major ports and waterways such as New York City, Los Angeles, San Francisco. We interdict 17 illegal migrants a day, and we investigate 35 pollution incidents a day. And we conduct 105 marine inspections a day. And then a big one for us is we facilitate the movement of $8.7 billion of goods and commodities through our national maritime transportation system by conducting escorts of these major tanker vessels that have tons and tons of cargo on board that are going to contribute to the economy. So that's a day in the Coast Guard right there. It's many different hats, and that's the main reason why I decided to join the Coast Guard instead of the Army. I don't know if my father shared this with you, but I almost decided to go the Army route through West Point, and I got to go see the Coast Guard Academy, and learning about all this stuff completely changed my perspective. And that's why I ended up where I am right now. So that's the general stuff about the Coast Guard. Now I wanted to provide some of my personal pictures for you, because I feel like the personal perspective is a lot more interesting than just learning the general overarching thing. So this is my first tour aboard Coast Guard Cutter Spencer. We were home ported out of Boston, Massachusetts, and these pictures all are taken during Hurricane Sandy response. We were the first and only Coast Guard ship for the first week of Hurricane Sandy's aftermath to respond and provide support to New York City. We were the first ship to go into New York City following Hurricane Sandy. We cleared the harbor. Our first task was to go through, navigate the harbor, find any obstructions that would result in collisions in the harbor. So as you can imagine, that was kind of a sketchy transit for us, going in very slow. I was standing on the forecastle as the first lieutenant. I was in charge of all of the deck force on board, all the flight operations, and all of the small boat operations that took place. So I was placed on the forecastle to make sure that we were spotting all of those navigational obstructions, and there were plenty of them. So it took us about 5 hours to do what should have taken us an hour to transit into the harbor. Once we got there, we anchored right in the vicinity of the Statue of Liberty, which was pretty cool. It definitely created a lot of good photo opportunities. But what our mission was, there was no power anywhere in New York City. So what we did is we stood up the command center for the entire New York and New England area because of the power being out. So we had two admirals on board the ship, and we had about 50 extra personnel working command center operations. And we provided all law enforcement, all SAR, all search and rescue, and any other capabilities that were needed, flight operations. We did it all. And so these other pictures on the left in the center, the picture of me in the center is me in my landing signals officer uniform, where I was in charge of directing the pilot to position the helicopter in the correct position so that we could airlift pieces of machinery to that helicopter, and they could take that into the city to get critical infrastructure stood up. And that's what that picture on the left is you can't see the helicopter because it's above where the picture was taken, but I'm providing hand signals to the pilot to keep him in place. And then I've got two of my folks from Deck Force are there handing up a line that was attached to an emergency generator that was going up to the helicopter. So pretty cool stuff for that was my first really big national recognition sort of mission, being and seeing exactly what the Coast Guard's role was. This was big for me, being a 23-year-old Lieutenant JG at the time, a year and a half out of the Coast Guard. This was a really cool opportunity. Next, this is my XO tour. I was a plank owner on this ship, which meant I was the first ever XO on board. We were the first ever crew. We commissioned a brand new ship, and you can see that picture in the top left. It's the Charles Sexton. She was the 8th fast response cutter commissioned into the Coast Guard. And the biggest accomplishment we had was this picture you see on the top right. So it's a little bit blurry because it was taken from the helicopter that was providing us with our aerial support. But what that is it's a homemade, it's called a Yola. It's a Dominican style migrant smuggling vessel that is homemade. It's made and constructed by the people that are inside that boat. And that is 117 Dominican migrants that were trying to make a migrant venture from Dominican Republic over to Puerto Rico to try to get into the United States. And we got on scene there as a 154-foot cutter to all of a sudden gain 117 new ship riders was a very intimidating and interesting situation, because when you come alongside this vessel, you can hardly see half of the people in the boat, let alone all 117 of them. You don't know if there's weapons on board. You don't know if there's any injuries or medical conditions. So very chaotic situation that we got thrust into. And we ended up doing a pretty good job. It took us about 4 hours to get all those people on board our ship off of that boat. And we were able to repatriate all of them safely with no medical issues or concerns whatsoever back to the Dominican Republic. And it's kind of hard to see in this picture. I'm in this boat right here. I was the non-compliant vessel team leader on this case. And I'm sitting on the front in the right seat on the console. My arm is reaching over there. I was holding their boat alongside of our boat. It's kind of hard to see, but that's where I'm at in this picture. And then this was my last tour. I just got done with about a year ago as the commanding officer of Coast Guard Cutter Forrest Redenauer, which was home ported right there in your neck of the woods in San Pedro, California. My last patrol, we got a methamphetamine bust. It was about 500 pounds of methamphetamine. And it was the first bust that had a methamphetamine on the West Coast in, I think, over a decade. So it was a pretty high profile case for us to get on my way out. And the pictures from that are on the top left and the top right. The top left is the actual contraband itself. That I got a still shot from the ABC News story they did on it. And then the top right is a picture of the boat. And I provided the picture of the boat just to show you how dilapidated and unsafe these smuggling boats can be. You can see exposed wires coming down right here in the right, coming down from the throttle, which exposed wires with electricity flowing through them and water don't generally create a very safe situation. So this can be a very polarizing topic in terms of smuggling, in terms of what people's thoughts are on it. But the main thing to remember in a smuggling venture is that they're almost always unsafe because the boats are usually not very seaworthy, and they definitely would not pass a Coast Guard boarding. So that's one thing to keep in mind. That's the main reason we're there, is to keep everybody safe and get the drugs off the streets and get the boat out of the water. And then the bottom left and the bottom right pictures depict a meeting we had with Guatemalan military branch chiefs. Every single branch chief from Guatemala, as well as the U.S. ambassador to Guatemala, came on board our ship. And we did this to try to facilitate sale of older ships to the Guatemalan military while we were conducting an Eastern Pacific counter-drug patrol down there. So that is some experience of mine. Some Coast Guard events that happened very recently that you may not know the Coast Guard was even involved in are on the top left here. This is the USS Monterey conducting patrol in the Middle East. And they launched a boat that boarded a stateless vessel that ended up having a ton of illegal weapons, ton of illegal Chinese and Russian made weapons that were being shipped to assist terrorists in fighting against the United States and allied forces. And what a lot of people don't know is that the people who actually did that boarding was an embarked Coast Guard Advanced Interdiction Team, which is our equivalent of the Navy SEALs. We have a special operations detachment inside of us as well, that they were embarked on the USS Monterey, and they were able to give the USS Monterey Coast Guard law enforcement authority by conducting that boarding while attached to them. So that's an example of how we can extend our authority and jurisdiction over to the Navy, which is pretty cool that we can work together seamlessly like that. And then on the right is the Coast Guard cutter Maui. It's a 110-foot ship, Coast Guard ship, that is stationed out in Manama, Bahrain. It's one of the 6 ships out there. They were escorting a nuclear submarine from the United States Navy, and 13 Iranian Defense Force gunboats started the charge at the sub, and the Maui was able to break station and fire 30 effective 50 caliber machine gun warning shots to convince the Iranian Defense Force that they should do something different that day. That's exactly what they did. So that's just some about the Coast Guard and some of the recent events that we've had. And I'm happy to take any questions that you all may have. Yeah. This is a picture of the ship that I was in command of out in Los Angeles. This is off the coast of San Diego. So,
Graham, this is just so incredible. I had not realized how forward deployed the Coast Guard is, and God, how exciting of a career you've had so far.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we do have a few questions for you, Graham.
Yes.
First of all, what role does Coast Guard have with American waterways, rivers?
So we actually do have some cutters that are called river tenders, and we manage in the rivers. We do the aids to navigation, where we're maintaining those buoys inside of the rivers. And we also, anytime there's a Coast Guard cutter anywhere, whether it be a river, Great Lakes, or on the ocean, we're always doing search and rescue and pollution response as well as pollution prevention. So the main mission would be aids to navigation on the rivers, but they are also capable and do conduct search and rescue, and they can spot and conduct any boardings on vessels that may be breaking any sort of pollution rules as well.
Wow. And then what sort of role does Coast Guard have in the response to hurricanes?
So in response to hurricanes, we have a very, very big response to hurricanes. So I know one of the big ones where we got a lot of our first ever media coverage was was down in Katrina. We got a ton of publicity for that. So our ships, if they are able to get underway and be positioned a little bit, out of the way of the hurricane, but able to respond immediately afterward, we'll generally reposition our ships to be able to do that. We'll get them out early so that that way they can come in right after the hurricane is done and provide any sort of support on the water, conduct search and rescue cases in that regard. Our air stations that fly our helicopters and our planes are incredibly involved. We have a rate of enlisted personnel in the Coast Guard called ASTs, which are the aviation survival technicians, which they're also known as rescue swimmers. And they get a lot of work during those hurricanes because they're the ones that are trained to tie themselves to the hoisting to hoist, and they get hoisted down into houses and pull people out of houses.
Wow.
We also get a very big membership on the incident management team, where we're working with the state and local and other federal partners that meet and stand up those headquarters down in the areas of disasters. So our Coast Guard captains of the port, which are 06, 07 level, the captain and admiral level, are usually hold a leadership position in the response team for that.
Wow, fantastic. Your day in the Coast Guard life, a day in the Coast Guard slide was incredible. I multiplied a number of those numbers by 365. Thousands of lives saved, nearly $1 trillion of commerce enabled, right, protected. Just amazing numbers. Now, Graham, stay on for a second, and we'd love to have you for the rest of the town hall as well. But we actually have a little bit more to add to your presentation. So just hold on.
Okay. Can I stop sharing my screen at this time?
You can. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
That's good. Perfect.
And we're going to share another screen here in a second. Give us a sec. There we go. Graham, there you are with President Obama. I believe is your graduation. I know the funniest things get said at graduations. Right. I would have loved to have been a fly on that wall.
It was he was just very, very down to earth when we all went up there. He was just like, "How you feeling?" And I was like, "Very nervous." Very nervous, very excited. That's pretty much the extent of the conversation we had. But yeah, he was that was an awesome opportunity to have the president there for that, for sure.
So I think the next slide, this is your girls, beautiful kids.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Let's go to the next one. And I think you're prepping one of your girls to be the next Coast team.
She is obsessed with the boat, so she might have a future in the Coast Guard for sure.
That's awesome.
I don't know how I feel about that yet, but we'll see in a couple of years.
That's fantastic. And this is we can't leave Dad out, right? This is, I think, was this at the change of command down in San Diego?
It is. This was in this was in San Pedro. This was my last day in command of the ship. This was when I got relieved of command, and Dad was able to come out and make the trip with me across. So that was awesome.
Yeah, he's very proud.
Indeed. Yeah.
It was awesome.
Thank you so much, Graham. Really loved it. And please, if you can, stay on for the rest of the town hall.
Yes, I appreciate that. I actually have a class coming up here in the next 30 minutes, so I have to go, but I can't part ways without giving you all of the traditional Sherman goodbye, which is have a strong end.
All right.
So, everyone have a strong end, and I deeply appreciate the opportunity to speak to you all today. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.